Okay, today I wanted to do a flip through from one of my earlier journals. So I've pulled out a journal from my shelf. This is journal number 5, which is fairly early. It was my 5th journal, so I'd probably been into journaling 4 or 5 years by the time. And if I open it up, it's 2004 is when I started this book. So I try to date at least when I start the book. A lot of times I'll also kind of put a date whenever I retire it or put it on the shelf. So this is kind of an early book, but it's really interesting to look through the earlier books to kind of see what was going on and what kind of stylistic things. It's like when I see these kind of pages, I still feel like I still do a lot of layering like this, but maybe not using the same images. Like I don't use magazine images much anymore, and just there's slight differences to kind of what I'm doing now. But then it's also really interesting to see how experimental things were in these earlier books and how not every page is layered. Now, not every page in my more current journals are layered extremely uh, to the extreme, but there's more layering. It seems like in these early books that there's kind of more white space and just kind of more openness. It's the journals that I'm working on now tend to be a little bit more full. But what's really interesting is to flip through something like this and find where like I have these like little secret compartments, and I like that interactivity. And I know I've kind of continue that with some of the journals I'm doing now with the windows and the doors, but to kind of see the seeds of that. I mean, there's no windows. Well, no, there's a couple windows, I think, in this one. But the other thing that's really interesting is that I used a lot of acrylic paint. And it's interesting to flip back and really understand how and see how the journal is this sort of, it's a product of its environment. So like what was going on. And at this time, back in 2004, I was teaching high school art. And it's really interesting to see kind of to see that and understand like, okay, I was teaching art, high school art. And so to kind of see things like the image transfer. So this has a lot more image transfers than I put in my books now. Here's another envelope. But a lot of the ideas that I was teaching my classes ended up in the book. So like whether it was doing sketches for projects or developing ideas. And so it really is. I mean, I can flip through here and really see a lot of things like whether it's notes that I was taking at a meeting or a conference, to exploring ideas. I think this kind of really came about because of Joseph Cornell and using images of myself. Like I said, I used a lot more magazines back then, a lot more image transfers. There's a window that looks through that piece of transparency. But just there was a lot going on. I was teaching high school, and so sketching out ideas, working out projects, and also just demonstrating, doing things that I would show my kids. So like whether it was photography that I was teaching, there's a lot of photographs in here from teaching the photography class. Here's another envelope with some collages that I started, never really finished. But this is all about photography and collage. Just a lot more experimenting. Here's an idea of layers and developing ideas and sketching out ideas. I don't do that so much anymore. But like when you're demonstrating to your students, like, oh, this is how you do it, or taking notes, jotting down things. These post-it notes I forgot to take out. decided not to fold back up. But it's really interesting to see some things that kind of stick. So I've got maps. I still use maps a lot in my work and in my journals. But like things like this is blind contour drawings. That was the basis of this. I don't do that much anymore. And at that time I was doing it a lot in my own art, but also doing it as a way to show students, to demonstrate to students about that. And, you know, here's a technique for drawing. So a lot of that, those just practical demonstrations that I would do for students ended up in the book at the time. And then even just like these collages, I look at these, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. I need to get back to that, like using magazines to do different kind of collages, but, you know, taking notes about how to do image transfers. So just you know, lots of different image transfers, ideas for classes that I'm teaching, ideas that I was teaching. Like I said, a lot more empty space, a lot more white space going on in it. This is based on a still life that was set up in the classroom. And it's kind of hard to tell, but yeah, there's some images that were drawn there. So when I look at this, I feel like it's a lot more experimental as far as the materials and the techniques. So, you know, tape transfers with newspaper seems to work. A lot less, like I said, a lot less layering. There are some pages that are really layered, but not as much as today. So here's an observational drawing of a small still life of tools. You know, so I definitely don't do that so much. Again, that's because I was in the classroom, either working directly with the students or demonstrating to the students. And then I was experimenting with a lot of materials. So it's, to get this texture in the background, it's tissue paper and acrylic medium. And so I was using a lot of acrylic paint in the book at the time because I was doing a lot of painting with the students. And then, you know, I'd demonstrate or I'd be working on stuff and have this extra paint. So what would I do? I'd open it up and I'd glue it in, or I'd paint it in. So just a lot more acrylic. I mean, there's a lot of acrylic on these two pages. So just much more experimental. And like I said, it's kind of more of a... I love the fact that the visual journal can be kind of like a time capsule. This is blind contour drawings of myself. So I was looking in a mirror and I see some glasses and a nose and little circles or eyes a lot of times. So I kind of did 2 or 3 of them on top of each other. But just, you know, taking notes about what I was teaching. You know, so this is really a time capsule of that year that I made this. And, you know, teaching art and, you know, teaching students how to draw and how to look, and teaching different techniques and how to develop ideas. And at the same time, you know, this was pretty early, 2004. So we're talking about 6 years before my first book was published. So I was still trying to figure out what the journal was to me. I mean, this is all acrylic with window screen in it. That I don't do that anymore. I might do that in a work that hangs on the wall, but not in my journal. Here's one experimenting with kind of gluing down images and peeling up some of them to let them tear. But again, you know, maps. I still use maps so much. So it's really interesting to see the differences, but then also to see some of the similarities. I mean, here's just random pieces of cloth glued in. You know, this seems very empty compared to some of this stuff, but then this is a little bit more layered. You know, there's some layering on these pages, but not a whole lot. It's really interesting to go back and flip through and see like what was going on, but then also seeing things that are like, oh, why am I still not, why don't I do that anymore? Like, I used to draw portraits all the time. This is my wife, and I drew it from a photograph, and I don't really draw portraits much anymore. Actually, I don't remember the last time I actually drew a realistic portrait. But I love this kind of stuff, like this experimentation with some of the collage materials. I like the big rips, and there's still some of the geometric elements like I still use, but this is much more organic, much more random, I would say. But what's really interesting is to find out when experiments didn't work. So here's one where it looks like the photograph melted on here, so I was probably ironing something. There's a technique where you can do iron-on transfers, and that's probably what happened. It heated up and got stuck. Yeah, it was probably this one. So I ironed this on at one point, and the heat probably transferred through several pages and stuck the photograph. But there's some things like windows. This was probably when I first started getting into doing a few windows and pop-ups. I don't do pop-ups much anymore. But this is fairly layered. Some image transfers, magazine stuff. But kind of getting to the end. But it's really neat to see, like, this feels very much like something I might do today, as far as like the watercolor and the layers and the geometric part of it. But then like this, the color combinations, my color combinations are very different now. So it's really interesting to look back and see this. Big sheets of newspaper. But yeah, kind of getting near the end because I can see things start to get a little less full. And, a little bit more empty. Especially here. But lots of notes about projects and things that I was doing in my classroom, or looking at different artists. But of course, still have my calendar that I still keep a calendar very much like this in my journal, and still keep a pocket to put fodder in, and still use lots of stickers. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of trip down memory lane and a flip through an old journal of mine, and stay tuned for more.